Hello, welcome in. Today I'm here to do a reading wrap up basically of everything that I read at the end of 2025. I was slacking on the wrap ups for a few months and honestly I wasn't reading very much. So it's just a few books. But first of all, I am so happy to say that I finished The Diviners. I finished King of Crows. I spent the whole year rereading the first 3 books of the Diviners series so that I could finally read King of Crows and finish it out. And honestly, this has solidified my love for this series. I think the first 3 books were even better the second time around. I mean, obviously there's some like slow points in the plot in the middle books, but God, it's just so well done. If you don't know, it's set in the 1920s, mostly in New York City, and it's about a group of characters who all have kind of supernatural abilities. That there's some kind of ominous supernatural threat going on in the city. And obviously they have the abilities to investigate it, but once they like solve one mystery, more and more just keep opening up and they're getting wrapped up in this thing that is so much bigger. And it's so good. Okay, first of all, the historical setting is just so fleshed out. The way that Librofm did this, it's so detail oriented and immersive, but it's also really thoughtful as far as like the themes of the story and the way that it addresses American history. In the author's note for King of Crows, she said that she wanted to write an American ghost story, and I think that's so what this is. It's about all of the things that haunt our country, all of the traumas and shames and griefs that keep coming back again and again and again to haunt us. And honestly, so much of it is like so relevant, right? Like this year specifically. I just love it. I love the setting and the themes and the story, and the characters are so lovable. Like, I feel like these are my friends. I feel like very real people to me, and that's like not something that happens often for me anymore, especially in a YA book. So I don't know, I highly recommend this. Anyways, another book that I read recently, which also had a historical setting, was Lone Women by Victor LaValle. I read The Changeling from him a few months ago and I really liked it. I like the kind of weird, bizarre social horror vibes he does. And this one is set in 1915 when basically the American government was like handing out land, stolen land of course, in Montana to homesteaders. So basically anybody that was willing to move out to the middle of nowhere and build a house and turn a piece of land into a productive farm, they could just show up. This included Black people and women, and our main character is a Black woman who moves from California to Montana to do this by herself, which is something that actually a lot of women did. That's, you know, the idea of lone women. This was like one of the only opportunities for a woman to like have her own property, and I mean even more so probably for Black women. So our main character is doing this, and with her she has a trunk that is holding a dangerous secret, and it has to remain locked at all times because whenever it gets unlocked, people die. I really enjoyed this. The historical setting was so fitting for the content, like the way that the Montana landscape is just so like isolated and hostile, and I really like where the story went and what it explored with that. Obviously I don't want to spoil anything, so I can't go into too much detail, but I do highly recommend this. Okay, the next book that I have on here is a romance called Haunted Ever After. This is set in a coastal Florida town called Boneyard Key, which is really known for its like hauntings and ghosts. So much so that the town has kind of become a tourist trap. But the main character just moved there from the city to buy a house, which she gets there and realizes is like one of the most famous haunted houses in the town. And the love interest is the guy who runs the local coffee shop around the corner. This was a genuinely cute story, and I loved the setup and the whole premise, but honestly this book was what made me realize that I can't do dual point of view romance. And I talked about this a little bit in a vlog a while ago, so I'm so sorry if you've already heard this rant, but I just don't know. I can't do it. I don't want to know both sides. Usually if the love interest is a guy, like it's that male point of view that I don't like being in, because first of all, me in a man's head, get me out of here. Second of all, the reason that it drains so much fun and tension for me is because the guy point of view is always just like immediately thirsting after her, like in a way that is almost gross and inappropriate. Like it's too much, too fast, too soon. I would rather kind of build up to it slowly and like work towards it, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, that's my rant again. Sorry if you had to hear it twice. And also, like, this is not to say it's a horrible bad thing. I know that it really works for a lot of people. Objectively speaking, I can totally see why. I see why people would like it. But yeah, just like for me personally, it really does not work. The next thing that I read was To Winter Nights, which is a collection of short stories set in the Dragon Age universe, which is my favorite video game. And obviously with short stories, it's always kind of hit or miss. Some of them are really good, others are not so good, but there were some really good ones in in here, and a lot of them had this really like eerie, dark, kind of Lovecraftian horror vibe to them, which was so fun. And after reading this, I actually started looking up the authors of those stories and the writers, because these are also the same people usually who write the video games, and seeing what they specifically contributed to the games, like what characters or quest lines. And that was really interesting as well, especially since so many of the people who have written really important characters or like really good storylines and stuff that has made the franchise what it is have been recently fired from the studio. So yeah, it's been fun to like see what individual writers are responsible for what, and I've been able to like follow some of my favorites so that if they get hired on at new studios or work on different video games, I can kind of follow what they're doing next. Another book that I read was Under the Skin: The Hidden Toll of Racism on American Lives and on the Health of Our Nation. This is about, first of all, racism in the healthcare industry, like for example, lack of access, poor care, even exploitation in like medical studies and stuff. But also, second of all, it's about the way that racism plays into health to begin with. Looking at the physical and mental effects of living in a racist society taking a toll on the body. It was kind of like a mix between data and studies and then also like personal anecdote. But yeah, obviously this is a really important topic that we should be aware of and acknowledge and hopefully find ways to combat moving forward. Another book that I listened to on Librofm was called Cult Following, and basically this is just like every chapter gives a little brief biography telling the story of a different cult. It was nothing like super in-depth or serious, but I kind of wish it had been. I would have loved to do more of a deep dive. But this was really just kind of a brief synopsis of like what the cult was about, who the leaders were, what kind of weird, awful activities they got up to, and how it ended, if it did. One thing that was kind of weird for me sometimes was the tone. Like it was a very lighthearted, silly, jokey tone, like making fun of cults. Obviously, sometimes cult stuff is really funny and silly and wacky, but there's also a lot of like really dark, tragic, messed up stuff going on in cults. Obviously, that kind of like funny, jokey tone doesn't really work all the time when you then are going into detail about stuff. Like you can imagine what people are going through, especially women and children in cults. So sometimes the tone, it kind of gave me whiplash between like this silly, goofy, haha, to like some really bad stuff. But it was still really interesting, and I learned a lot of stuff that I never knew. Like for example, I did not know that the Phoenix brothers, the actors River and Joaquin Phoenix, they escaped from a cult when they were young. It also went into so many different cults that like I had never heard of, had no idea existed. Like it was really interesting and full of information. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to talk about, probably one of my favorite things that I read, was None of This Rocks. This is the memoir of Joe Troman from Fall Out Boy. Fall Out Boy has been my favorite band since I was like a preteen, since their second album. Like this band raised me, basically. I saw them live last year and I could have died of happiness. And I thought it was really cool to hear this book from Joe, because he's usually like such a quiet member of the band. He always kind of like sticks to the background and we don't really hear a lot from him. And after reading this, actually, I understand a lot more about why that is. I learned so much about his personality and like how he views his own role in the band. But also I learned that a lot of the things I really love about Fall Out Boy have come from Joe. In the book, he talks about like what albums he contributed to the most and which ones he kind of sat back on, and like what sounds he pushed for. And it made me realize that a lot of my favorite albums and stuff that I like about Fall Out Boy was his influence. And he also talks about his other projects. For example, he's in a band called The Damned Things, which I knew about but had never really gone to listen to much before, and I did now, and actually I love them. But also I really liked that this book was about so much more than just his music career and just about Fall Out Boy. Actually, I think that if you removed everything about Fall Out Boy from this book and like published it anonymously or something, like I think it would stand just as well as like a really relatable and down-to-earth conversation about things like depression and family and insecurity, growing into like, if not confidence, at least like a acknowledgement of who you are and what you bring to the table. Like I loved this, and I know that I'm biased, but it was so beautiful and so good. Again, even like aside from anything to do with Fall Out Boy, this was such a wonderful book. So yeah, those are all of the things that I read up to the end of 2025. Let me know in the comments what you have been reading recently. I would love to know. Thank you for watching, and I hope I get to talk to you soon. Bye!